This is Have the Nerve, a podcast by Spinal Cord Injuries Australia. I am Susan Wood, and you may be thinking, Susan, your voice sounds very different, and you're right. I am the ironic recipient of walking pneumonia. And I considered not doing an intro, but it's been 3 weeks now, and who knows when this will clear up. But it's not about me. In this episode, you're about to meet Dr. Claire Boswell-Ruys.
My name's Claire Boswell-Ruys. I'm a Senior Research Fellow here at Neuroscience Research Australia, also known as NeuRA. I'm a physiotherapist by background, and so I started off my physiotherapy career working in spinal cord injuries, which has been my passion.
She is a Senior Research Fellow at Neuroscience Research Australia and has worked in the area of spinal cord injuries for the last 20 years. This was recorded earlier in the year, and we talk about all things research. We talk about Project Spark, the eWalk trials, Get a Grip, and some of the highs and some of the realities of being a researcher. This is a companion podcast to episode 43 with Duncan Wallace from Spinal Cure Australia, so if you haven't given that a listen, please consider listening to it after this episode.
I've met a lot of people who are physiotherapists to begin with and then just become something else. But sort of like part of their job it's still like their core part of their job. Yes. And now you're in research. Do you want to give an overview of what you're working on at NeuRA and the latest trials and anything you can talk about? So I know that years and years ago I actually asked you whether or not you want to do it and you're like, nah, I can't really talk about it. But can you talk about it?
I can talk about lots of things. There's going to be some things I can't reveal too much information about, but there's so much research going on here at NeuRA in the field of spinal cord injuries that we could be here for hours.
That's exciting.
It is really exciting. And I think, at NeuRA, which has undergone a transformation in terms of its name, but there's been a long history of spinal cord injury research here, even before I arrived. And I think that's why I have got involved. So back in the early 2000s, there was a Premier's grant for spinal cord injury research, and that sort of kicked off a little bit of the focus here, I guess, in terms of research projects. But the team in spinal cord injuries, which is led by Simon Gandevia and Jane Butler, they had done a lot of research already in spinal cord injuries, and so they're sort of the head of the team, and then the team has grown a lot. And so now we probably have close to 25 researchers involved, which is super exciting. And so where to start is going to be the hardest question of what research projects we're doing here. How about we start with my passion? I mentioned respiratory.
Yes,
let's start with respiratory. So Jane is a respiratory neurophysiologist, and so that's her area of the control of breathing. So I really got involved with her early on, and that's what got me started in research. Was I had a particular patient in the hospital who couldn't move to rehab because he had a tracheostomy. Which meant he couldn't get out of the acute side of the hospital. So that led to talking with some of the researchers here at NeuRA, and they said, why don't we try something like some electrical stimulation of the abdominal muscles to improve his cough and see if we can get that tracheostomy out, because essentially he can't clear his secretions, so he can't move on. So we just developed a single case study, and the patient, he was absolutely happy with being involved with that because he was frustrated.
Yeah.
He'd been in the acute hospital for like 8 months waiting to get to rehab. So the end of that story was it was very successful for him. He had his tracheostomy out within 3 weeks, and he moved to rehab a week later. So super exciting, just from having this abdominal functional electrical stimulation placed on his stomach. And we were just using some of the literature that was out there, placing it on some of the tummy muscles, but then that just developed further into where actually is the best place to place these electrodes. How can we optimize someone's cough? How can we get the best pressures? And so there's a lot of detail in there about how we measure those pressures, which is gross. But that is sometimes part of research. We have to do a few gross things, all with people's consent, of course.
When you're putting the electrical stimulation on his abdominals, how does that affect the tracheotomy?
So what that does is it makes, when we cough, we use our abdominal muscles. So if we need to clear our secretions, we take a deep breath in, create pressure with our stomach muscles, and then generate a cough. If someone can't generate that pressure because they don't have the ability to take a deep breath in, so they can only take a small breath in, or they can't actually generate the pressure with their abdominal muscles, then they can't cough. So lots of people who've got a cervical injury firstly can't take that deep breath in because their diaphragm and intercostal muscles aren't super strong. They're either completely paralysed or they've got some partial paralysis.
Okay.
So getting that deep breath in first is an issue. Secondly, producing the cough, which is produced by our abdominal muscles. If someone has an injury anywhere from T6 upwards, those abdominal muscles are going to be weak or completely paralysed. So they can't actually generate the pressure and the force required to produce a cough.
I have seen a couple of times, it's very funny. I went to karaoke once years and years ago, and it was like, I love karaoke. I go there often.
When we want to know which karaoke bar so we can actually go and see you.
It's everywhere, guys. You want to go to Burwood, you want to go to the CBD, I will turn up wherever you need me to be. So I was at a karaoke bar in, I don't know, it was like 6 years ago or something. A lot of people, clients with disabilities who also attended, and I just have this very clear memory of turning, and then there was somebody who was lying flat on their back, and somebody was trying to force a cough out of them to the beat of the karaoke. And it was just, okay, now I understand a little bit more about how the abdominal works with that sort of, that perfectly makes sense. They probably just needed to cough and they couldn't.
It's almost like doing the Heimlich maneuver. I think with the electrical stimulation, it really started because to generate, as physios, we train carers to produce a cough by pushing on those stomach muscles, and it's really labour intensive. So if you can have something that's not going to become an occupational risk and hazard, then I guess having electrical stimulation there to generate that same force can also mean that people have more control over when they need to cough. So, an ultimate aim would be to have these pads that stick on, or, a strap on or something, that then a client can actually stimulate themselves by pushing a buzzer or giving a voice control to be able to create a cough so that they can cough when they want.
Yeah, because that whole scene at the karaoke bar looked quite violent. It was by a team of there was some exercise physiologists and physiotherapists around who knew what to do, but it was so violent looking, and then the irony of everybody singing to the right of me and then it's happening to the left. Anyway, I'm sure that if he had a button he could have just pressed at the time, that would have sent something off, and it wouldn't have meant that two people were there trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah. And it's amazing when you hear little sound bites of how the stimulation can actually even intensify that cough. So you can go from this little to a big and so it's really amazing to be able to hear that, and for them to see somebody actually cough up a good goober as well. And it's just awesome.
Is this part of the gross stuff that you're this is what we're basing it on?
Yeah. Physiotherapy is not all about the glory of being able to help someone, be able to run a marathon or something, heal their muscles. It's, some of the gross clearing secretions. Project Spark. Well, there are many things I can talk about that. And to talk about Project Spark, it's working with Spinal Cure Australia, and a lot of other organisations as well, Spinal Cord Injuries Australia and NeuRA Moves, and NeuRA, and Catwalk Trust in New Zealand. Like, there's a whole conglomerate of people who are contributing to this overarching project of Project Spark. So NeuRA is helping to coordinate some of the trials that are under the umbrella of Project Spark. So one of the trials is called Get a Grip. And Get a Grip is a trial that is looking at hand and breathing function, utilizing the technology of neurostimulation, and specifically spinal cord stimulation. There's been a lot of hype about spinal cord stimulation, which has arisen from the pain literature. So people with back pain that have not had good treatment responses have sometimes gone and had a neurostimulator implanted on their spinal cord. And so this is called an epidural neurostimulator. And what they discovered when they put this stimulator on, rather than just putting it at a pain at a threshold to alleviate pain, when it's turned up a little bit higher, it can actually create muscle contractions. Some of this is not new because this is the principle of TENS, transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation, where pads get put on a painful area, electrical stimulation pads on the skin, and then you can put this TENS on as well. But you can actually change the parameters of the TENS and make it actually create muscle contractions too by stimulating the nerve and the muscle. This is all based on sort of reflex arc circuitry within the spinal cord, going back to the muscles and back and forth. Then in somebody who hasn't had a spinal cord injury, that is then modulated by the brain and through the spinal cord to control how much that can occur. So coming back to
I'm trying to follow along. I'm like, yep, I think I've got it.
Oh, my brain might just sort of go off onto a tangent, but I'll try and come back.
No.
Remind me to come back to the topic
we're good.
we're discussing.
We're good.
So this spinal cord stimulation has come out of this pain literature and pain treatment. And obviously some people are not keen on having something implanted on their spinal cord. So can we produce the same effect of that spinal cord stimulation, but just on the surface of the skin? So someone doesn't have to have a stimulator implanted. So people have implanted the stimulator and showed that it can produce gait-like movements. There's a case study over in Switzerland who they've shown that there can be a good locomotor pattern sort of produced, but there's not a lot of cases where it has been done that have been published that the world can actually, the scientific world can actually review and go, wow, that's how is that working? But people from our lab have been over and seen some of the mechanics of it and seeing that it takes a huge team of people, mainly engineers, just programming these stimulators to produce those gait-like patterns. So if you think about every muscle in the leg needs a different program to produce a walking pattern.
Wow. Okay.
So that's a lot of programming, and there's a lot of really skilled people out there that could do that. So what we're doing here under Project Spark and in our trials is we're applying the principle of spinal cord stimulation on top of the skin, over the spinal cord, over certain areas that provide the nerves to those muscles that produce movement. So if I come to the Get a Grip trial, which is looking at hand and breathing function, so all of those functions come from the cervical spinal cord. So we are applying an electrical stimulation on top of the spinal cord, on the skin surface, through sticky pads, and then we adjust the parameters to know that we are actually targeting the muscles of the arm and the breathing muscles, and then we apply the stimulation for half an hour. We get people to do some arm and breathing exercises, hand and arm breathing exercises. Some exercises based on we know are specific for strengthening, some which we know are specific for function, and then exercises that are around people's goals as well, of what they might like to achieve. So the trial itself for each individual is 6 weeks, 3 times a week, half an hour of exercises with stimulation. It's for people who've got a cervical spinal cord injury, and there's a few contraindications to electrical stimulation. So someone with a pacemaker, for example, or an implanted electrical device may not be able to participate. But generally, and also people who are ventilated may not be able to participate. But it's very inclusive. It's not a randomized controlled trial. Which is actually very unique. This is here at NeuRA, this is our first foray into a trial which is not randomized, but it's called a phase 2 trial, which means that everybody gets the intervention, and we do our measures before and afterwards, and then we look for what we call a signal of benefit. So within those measures before and afterwards, we want to see which measure actually responds best to the intervention, and then look at moving that into a randomized controlled trial later. So it's sort of in the development phase of, well, these outcomes seem to respond best to the intervention, so they would be more likely to show response in a randomized controlled trial where we're actually comparing no intervention or a sham intervention with the real intervention. And what this phase 2 trial for Get a Grip also shows us is that we can split people up into groups. So we can have people who've got, we can include more people across more groups of people to have a look at, say, the newfandangled kilohertz electrical stimulation,
okay.
which it goes like, it just delivers the stimulation really, really fast.
Okay.
And it's supposed to be less painful, more comfortable, and this is what they've been using, particularly in the implanted stimulators. But what we traditionally use, which is, we call it a conventional electrical stimulation, which you can buy off the shelf, maybe that is just as good. We can, in the laboratory setting, we can actually produce the same responses in the muscles, but some people don't find it as comfortable. So what we can do is, in this Get a Grip trial, we can compare both of those 2 types of stimulation, and also we can have a look at how people with motor complete injuries respond, and how people with motor incomplete injuries respond. So potentially, as I mentioned before, that when we put this electrical stimulation on, it's using a reflex circuit arc that comes from the muscles to the spinal cord and back out again. So when we're stimulating right over the spinal cord, we're going from the spinal cord out to the muscles and back into the spinal cord. So either method can be modulated via the brain.
Okay.
Yep. So potentially using, when people have an intact or semi-intact spinal cord, they can modulate better. So they can use their thought processes to actually enhance the effect of the stimulation. Okay. Potentially. Like that's trying to make it in the simplest terms possible.
The brain's pretty powerful.
The brain is pretty powerful. The connections in the spinal cord are pretty amazing. Using this design of the trial, we can have a look at specifically how people who clinically are motor complete, how they respond, and then clinically how people who are motor incomplete, how they might respond, or even sensory incomplete, how they might respond. So the way the trial is set up is that you get a group of people, they do the trial, you have a look at their outcomes. If there's no change in the outcomes, then we unfortunately have to say that that intervention is futile in that group of people for that intervention.
So, what was I going to say? When people go through these trials, and even if they're randomized and they come out of it and either it hasn't worked for them or it turns out they had like the sham trial, there must be a level of devastation.
To a point.
Yeah.
I think because there's always this hope that there will be some outcome that is beneficial to each person. And I think ethically for us, part of our research ethics proposals, we have to actually declare that we can't guarantee there will be a benefit. However, at the same time, many people who come in, get involved with these trials, actually just do it not just for their own benefit, but for the benefit of the research and the benefit of people in the future.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a very, very mutually beneficial arrangement, I guess, that there potentially could be an outcome for the person being involved in the trial. There's definitely a beneficial outcome for the researchers, but also for the people in the future. Like if one person doesn't respond, but everybody else does respond, that is an outcome that's beneficial.
EWalk?
EWalk. EWalk is a randomized controlled trial looking at the effect and efficacy of that transcutaneous electrical stimulation over the spinal cord, but over the lumbar section of the spinal cord, which has a little locomotor center in it that helps to control and modulate walking. So the EWalk trial is a 12-week trial for each individual, 3 times a week with the electrical stimulation, and it's walking on a treadmill for 2/3 of the time and walking over ground for 1/3 of the time. And it is an international trial led by NeuRA. So we have sites in Spain, Glasgow, Chicago, and Melbourne, and here in Sydney. So it is approaching the end, which is very exciting. And we have developed this trial to be it is the first ever fully powered randomized controlled trial which investigates a sham stimulation compared to a real stimulation. So far, we have not had anybody unblinded, so it's completely blinded. So the therapist providing the intervention, the participants involved, and the assessors, they don't know who is getting the stimulation. That is pretty amazing. And I would just love to have a big call out to the electrical computer engineering people who created the code for this. It's just, pretty cool.
I guess the way that electrical stimulation works, like I've had bits of it on me, on like my right leg and stuff. And for me, it hurts. And so how do you mimic that pain and then have it completely fake?
Yes.
Yeah.
I know, that is the absolutely amazing thing about this trial. And I can't reveal too much of how
absolutely not.
That placebo or the sham intervention actually works, because it's being utilised not only in this trial, but it's going to be utilised in future trials. But it's amazing that the guys that have helped develop it, have made it work. So it feels exactly the same. It looks exactly the same. It's delivered the same. And I have to say, I had it on the other day because I was testing out some of the instruments, and I was just like, I know I've got the sham on, and gee, it just doesn't feel like the sham should. But it's the perfect placebo, because it just works like it. Well, it works like it should. Feels like it should, and we are, because none of us know, we are all convinced that everybody is getting the treatment.
Yeah.
So that's the perfect thing, and so everybody gets this the real or the sham stimulation, and they all get the gold standard, which is walking therapy. So whether it's walking on a treadmill or walking over ground, we know both of those can enhance people's ability to walk. In this EWalk trial, it's because it was the first one, we had to start somewhere. And we knew people in the States were using epidural stimulation with people who had complete paraplegia or complete quadriplegia. And so we said, well, they're doing that, and we know it's really intensive to actually get those parameters correct. But we do think there's a serious modulation and serious connection from the brain to the spinal cord that can help to modulate this and enhance. So let's make our population for this first trial people who have a little bit of information coming through, but not enough information to make them of a a high walking ability. So people who are involved in the eWalk trial are very impaired in their walking ability, so maybe they're able to take one step with assistance, maybe they can walk just 10 metres with a moderate amount of assistance using parallel bars or a gait aid and still requiring somebody to be with them. So quite impaired, and see what sort of improvements we can get. So that's it.
Yeah. And something I actually didn't put down in the questions, but we did discuss a bit earlier, was in our pre-interview. When we put this up on our social media, you put it up on the Spinal Cure as well, we got a lot of questions that were about, am I going to be able to take part in this trial? Now, for myself, my paraplegia is incomplete, and you've already seen me in action like 3 years ago, and I did not qualify. So, but can you talk about that? So, not everyone can qualify, but fine, but not everyone can qualify.
Yeah, it's such a hard thing as a researcher to actually make those parameters around designing a trial and figuring out who to include. So obviously we want to target everybody, but because this is the flagship trial, this is the first time it's ever been done, we had to be really quite strict in our inclusion criteria and our exclusion criteria. So considering what everybody else has done, of who we think is going to be the target population, how we can actually handle, I guess, the intervention physically ourselves, and how much potential harm we could be doing to people who, I guess, are going to be wanting to be involved in the trial. So we have to set out all those parameters, and if anybody's seen our participant information sheet, there's probably about 50 little tick boxes that people have to go through. So things like when we were setting this trial up, we really wanted to be cautious about people's shoulder integrity and their upper limb strength. So we didn't want to be getting people to be pushing down on their arms, trying to walk when all their shoulder muscles were not necessarily fully intact because of their spinal cord injury. So unfortunately that first of all limited the people who had cervical spinal cord injuries. The second thing is, and this is just talking about levels of injury, that this type of therapy works on reflex circuitry. So that circuitry has to be intact. So if you think about the structure of the spinal cord, the bottom of the spinal cord comes down to this little point, and then all these little hairy nerves come out the bottom, and that's called your cauda equina. So that very bottom is considered a peripheral nerve, and just above that, where the locomotor centre is, that's still in your spinal cord proper. So anybody who has a lesion below that locomotor centre around the L1 area, they may not respond to this therapy because it's based on a reflex arc with the spinal cord being intact. So we had to make a cutoff at around the level of T11, T12 to ensure that people had that reflex arc. So if someone was coming in and said, I fit the criteria for that really impaired walking ability, but my injury level is at L2, I guess we as the researchers would then delve into a lot more questions about if people gave consent to be asked these questions, well, does your sensation stop at L2 as well? Whereabouts does that stop? Before we get you in, we want to make sure that, we're not wasting your time in coming in to see if the therapeutic effect of the intervention is going to be working for you. So that's just talking about our inclusion criteria in terms of cervical versus lumbar versus thoracic injuries. And then there's some people, we made it initially that we wanted these, what we call this reflex arc, or these reflexes, to be on both sides of the body. And so some people have come in and unfortunately only had the reflex on one side but not the other side. So that was in our first iteration. So we've sort of come to revise that as well for our second iteration of another trial. But we'll come to the other trial later. We're still talking about EWalk.
I know. I think we're still on question 1. No, that's completely fine. No, it's just that research is so big, right? So you were talking about the United States, and this is not the first time I've heard people mention the States, but surely that's not the only place in the world that's like currently doing spinal cord research. Do you know, / do you want to...
Oh my goodness. So many... There's
what are the heavy hitters?
The heavy hitters. The States is a heavy hitter. They have this in Chicago, they've got this amazing lab, Shirley Ryan Research Laboratory, and they're amazing. They do a lot of spinal cord injury research, and so they're a big heavy hitter. There's some other research labs on the other side of the country as well. There's lots of research that comes out of America, which is fantastic. There's a really good research hub in Switzerland in spinal cord injury research, and they are amazing and thorough. And they're once again, they're looking at walking and breathing and sitting balance, and that's just looking at a few of the physical things. There's other people that are looking at pressure areas and bowels and autonomic dysreflexia. So there's lots of things that are going on. And like I mentioned, Spain, they've got a small research hub there. The United Kingdom are fantastic as well. There's lots of stuff coming out. So there's it's just like there's lots of stuff going on. It's just finding the areas, I guess, that are accessible for people in terms of being able to participate.
And funding, Claire, funding. Something that was quite frequent on our social media was like, wish you can have it at this location, wish you can have it at this location. Why can't it be here? Do you just want to go through what it takes to get a trial even funded or accepted to be funded and then funded, and then, why it just unfortunately can't be everywhere? Australia is such a big country with a small population compared to the United States. It's not like you can go from here to Townsville to like whatever and still have the exact same number of people with an SCI that you might require for that particular study.
I hope I get the order right. Okay. Research. Got to come up with the idea first.
Yes.
Yep. So you got to create your research plan and do all the scientific reading and the background material to figure out, is this feasible? Could we do such and such in this population? Is there science behind it to support research? Then once you've got that plan and you've got a team that's willing to work with that and has all the skills, then you can apply for funding, because you've got the team, but can you actually afford to pay for the team? And so, because we all need jobs. We all need to feed ourselves. We all need to live somewhere. I know. Who wouldn't think that these amazing bodies need fuel or, shelter? So applying for funding is fraught with lots of anxiety and frustration and disappointment and joys. There are a few funding bodies in Australia, government funding bodies and private funding bodies and philanthropy. So there's sort of the three main areas, I guess, where you could apply. Some bodies designate funding in rounds, so you can apply for it under certain schemes. So you have to make sure your research plan fits in with their scheme and the criteria that they want, and that you personally as a researcher also fit those criteria. So you've got to make sure that your research is a fit for the funders. And then there's a whole process of applying. So sometimes when people know that they're going to be giving money out, so whether it be the government or another organisation, they will give you maybe 4 months notice. So you've got to get everything together, get all these documents signed, get letters of support, make sure that everybody's CVs are up to date and everything as well. Like you need those 4 months. And then you submit it. And then you wait around for another 6 months waiting for the results of that funding process. And unfortunately in Australia we have a very low success rate. So it's way under 10%. I think it's probably between 5 and 10 success rate of getting funded.
What you mean, research generally, or your specific
research generally? Yeah, not even specifically spinal cord injury research. Yeah. So
how?
Yeah.
How?
I know it's really I think the government has a certain amount of money, and so they do want to support research, but there's so much research going on, and research is really costly. So, then they get these panels together to figure out what is going to be the most promising research and what fits the criteria, and so they rank all these research applications to figure out which is the best. And so we're all competing against each other for this funding as well.
Have you seen more success with? I know you said government grants is 5 to 10%. You had more success with philanthropy.
Yeah, yep. I think philanthropy and private organisations, there is much more success, and I guess maybe the success rate is probably closer to 20%. So, which still sounds really low, but that's say they have 1 grant to give and they have 5 applicants. There you go. Yeah. that's your 20% success rate. I guess philanthropists and private organisations will then target research groups and say, look, we've got this pot of money. We want to support research in this area. So, do you have a research project, or do you have the skills to provide such and such a research program? And so then people can apply. So it's still competitive. It's still looking at the best and most promising application or program, but it's a lot more targeted. So there is much more success, but then you're restricted to a little bit about what the private organisation or what the philanthropy organisation wants in terms of output. Sometimes that aligns really well, so you can get a really good research partner, and I'd say that we have some really good research partners, but sometimes it can backfire as well. So it's just making sure that you've got those good relationships and the I guess outcomes aligned. Living in research and then having those organisations and private donors or philanthropists that are coming from a different perspective. So just that, which we've really appreciated in the last couple of years, is educating each other in terms of actually how each side of those organisations work. So how the research works and how the organisation in terms of the fundraising and the relationships with the people who have vested interests in the outcomes works.
Hey everyone, this is the raspy voice of Susan again, Senior Content Manager at Spinal Cord Injuries Australia and host, producer, editor of this show. Usually I wait until the end of this episode, but I wanted to ask you, the listener, if you could do us a favour and please rate and review this program wherever you stream your podcasts. And also please feel free to tell one other person about it. Disability-related information is so hard to come by, and we hope that this podcast and the topics we talk about can help somebody feel empowered, independent, or just generally more knowledgeable. Now back to the show.
it is such a process of, once, you are successful with some grant money, that's fantastic. Now you've got a grant and the grant has a contract. And so you have 3 years, 4 years if you're lucky, 5 years if you're really super special, to fulfill the criteria of that grant. And so then you have to start working on that and fulfilling the project. And the first part is actually applying for ethics to actually conduct the research. So you got your project plan, you've got your funding, now you need approval to actually do that research with human participants, or if people are working in animal experimentation, then that sounds terrible. Animal experimentation sounds like I'm torturing animals. But that's the whole thing. Everything is actually ethically guided. So you have to get your project plan together, then you have to put an ethics proposal together and develop a participant information sheet and advertisements that all get approved by a committee that then say, yeah, that's great. That sounds like you're following all the procedures and you're trying to mitigate any risks. But then they also come back and say, oh, you haven't considered blah, blah, blah. Or you haven't considered, the fact that you're putting these pads on people's skins, but you haven't mentioned anything about there's risks involved, like they could get a burn. Or, electrical stimulation. Have you considered people who might have an implanted device? Yeah. Or you're walking these people on a treadmill. It's going to be a huge impact. What about those people that haven't actually stood and haven't walked for 20 years? It's like, okay, well, those people, we would love to be able to include them, but maybe they need to actually have a small integrated program, so they need to also be cleared by their medical specialists. So you can't recruit everywhere because each site actually requires a cost to set up. So they need the equipment, which is not cheap, that's right. So we're looking at a good $20,000 for just the stimulator that we're using. And then if we're doing a walking trial, each site has to have a treadmill and a bodyweight support system. Sometimes it takes 2 to 3 people to help walk somebody on a treadmill, let alone operate the equipment. So you have to have the staff as well. So there's your setup costs. You might have money to actually then support participants coming. And so you can pay participants for their time, but quite often there's not enough money in the grant to support that. You might have enough money to be able to support people travelling to your centre. So we know Sydney, we're here almost in the heart of Sydney, but there's people who live in Campbelltown. And so for them to be able to come to us, it's going to take over an hour of travel time. So can we pay for their taxis? Do we have that in a grant? Do we have parking to allow them? Do we have money to reimburse them for their petrol? Even within Sydney, which is a huge metropolitan area, we still have this one single research hub. If we were then to set it up, say, in Campbelltown, then we'd have to have all the infrastructure there. So we'd have to have the space, we'd have to have the staff, we'd have to have the gym. So it's either then relocating all our staff and equipment, which then takes away from, I guess, the staff doing other things. Do we get people to travel? If we can get them to travel to us, then it's great. But that's just in the metropolitan area. So we're fortunate here in Sydney that we can oversee projects if we set them up remotely from NeuRA. When we set them up in a site outside of Sydney, we have to have someone who oversees that site. So in setting up eWalk, we've been very fortunate that we've had investigators who have the skills in those countries. And we specifically chose those investigators in those countries because they had the skills and the specialised skills in this neurophysiology. So eWalk has been set up in that way of hubs that people come to, and we've had just enough to be able to support people coming in.
Have you ever come across a situation where you're funded for research, you're ready to go, you have 3 years, and you can't make 3 years for like one reason or another. So, you know, I'm very familiar with grant applications and the parameters around it. This podcast is a grant application, and I definitely know the clock ticks on this sort of thing as well. So, and a part of you wants to go, I want to continue this. How do I continue this? But maybe you can't.
Yep. It's so frustrating. So I was involved in a trial which was about 10 years ago, that was looking at using probiotics to assist with the reduction of urinary tract infections in people with spinal cord injuries.
100%. I'm on board with that.
On board with that one? Yeah. Oh my goodness. I am so clearly anything to reduce those awful urinary tract infections. And so we'd figured out our sample size, we figured out our protocol, got all the people on board that needed to, we got them funding. Recruitment was pretty good. I think we got 300 people in, but we needed 400 people. And we got to 3.5 years, I think, down the track, maybe 4 years down the track. It was probably, I think it was a 5-year grant, and we can't actually finish the recruitment for this. So you just have to pull the plug, and it's really sad unless you're able to get additional funding, extensions, investigate other areas to get funding from. You can keep sort of eking it out and continuing, but it's the really hard reality. Sometimes you just have to say, I've just got to stop, and I've just got this data on 3/4 of the sample that we needed. We may not be able to draw the full conclusions. So sometimes you can say that this trial, or you give you explanations of why you had to stop the trial early, and then you do your statistical analysis, you still write it up, but unfortunately you may have to draw the conclusion of, this looked like it was working. You know, you can see a difference between the two groups, but unfortunately the statistics show that they're not statistically different from each other.
Right.
So you can't definitively conclude that something works over the other. It is really sad. You can say it looks like it is, but I wouldn't put all my eggs into that basket.
Why was it 400 and not 300?
So all that is based on what is previously published and how the groups are set up and what you're trying to find between the groups. So I'm going to use our walking trial, I think, as example, because it's cleaner because there's only 2 groups. So in eWalk, we're looking at walking ability. And the way we measure walking ability in this trial is using it's called the whiskey scale, walking index for spinal cord injury, with a glass of whiskey in your hand and how well you can balance it. And
okay.
That's why it's called whiskey.
Okay.
No, it's not. Whiskey. So whiskey is the acronym.
WISCI.
Correct.
Yes.
Yep. And so it defines levels of ability. So in our eWalk trial, we are recruiting people who initially have a walking ability between 1 and 6 out of 20. So 1 is not able to walk 10 metres in parallel bars, but can take a step or 2.
Okay.
Or 3 or 4, however many it might be, but not up to 10 metres. 6 is being able to walk at least 10 metres with a frame and a gait aid, like a brace on a knee or something, and assistance of 1 person. So no higher ability than that. To define whether somebody has improved, I think and this is the general consensus, most people say any improvement is great, but we have to put limits on how much is a minimally worthwhile improvement, or minimal worthwhile clinical difference. And for that, it's 2 points on the whiskey scale. And that's a change between the 2 groups. So the group that gets the sham and the group that gets the real stimulation. That difference is based on previously published data that's been collected through other walking trials. not specifically looking at neurostimulation. You plug that into a calculator with also the differences in the variations of what has been published. So we call that the standard deviation, and it's a measure of how different a group of people can be. Our initial group that we start with is between 1 and 6. So the differences across there, the variance across there, is going to be quite small. It's going to be like sort of 2 to 3. We've got our difference between our groups, which is 2, and our standard deviation, which is about 2, which is quite nice numbers to work with. You plug that into a little formula and a calculator, and it spits out that says that you need roughly around 25 people in each group to show a difference of at least 2 between the two groups. That includes people who you might recruit and drop out, and they might drop out halfway through the trial. So it includes a dropout rate as well, or a unable to tolerate sort of rate, or a non-compliance rate, I guess I should say as well. Overall, it's calculated that we need 50 people in the trial, 25 in each group. There's parameters around how you calculate the number of people you need in a group, in a trial. So if you are then comparing more than 2 groups, 4 groups, then you are going to need more people in the trial. And depending on what sort of trial it is, you might start with a really high dropout rate. For the probiotics trial, for example, that had a high dropout rate because the intervention is interfering with people's gut motility. And so predictably there's going to be a number of complications that people have with that, because it's affecting everything. And it's very important to have stable bodily functions when you have a spinal cord injury, because it affects your whole day or your whole week. We've found with our EWALK trial we've had very few dropouts, so this meant that for future planning of trials of a similar nature, you can actually reduce that rate, so therefore you don't need to recruit quite as many people to make up to the numbers. Anyway, they're getting into the nuances of the mathematics and using that terrible word statistics.
I don't think it's terrible. I love statistics.
Are you lying?
No. I just did a 10-part series on the Royal Commission where all I looked at was statistics.
Statistics are amazing. It's just remarkable how much you can find out.
But sometimes people literally need percentages and numbers to be able to prove to them that something is a thing.
Yep, absolutely.
I guess when you're coming to spinal cord injury, there's already such few people in this country.
That's right. So in Australia, statistics. Okay, 350 new cases per year, about 20,000 people.
Study, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I know. Well, unfortunately, it's just changing the nature of what type of injury people have. But anyway, I think in Australia we do have very small numbers, so it makes actually these bigger clinical trials really hard to run. And I'm going to give a shout out to another researcher, an amazing lady called Lisa Harvey, who is amazing at doing big international research trials looking at physiotherapy interventions. And she's fantastic at recruiting for big trials, like we're talking about 200 people, sponsored by Australia, but recruiting in different countries around the world.
Okay.
To look at physiotherapy interventions and their effectiveness. And so she's got a really good model of partnering with other countries to actually be able to recruit the number of people to actually show effect or no effect, whichever the case may be. And I guess sometimes when we're setting up a trial, we always want to see an effect, but sometimes getting the result of no effect is just as good, because it shows that this area of research is just not feasible or worthwhile. Yeah. That's right. So, and that is great, because then that drives the way that we practice, because we might find that one of the things that we're doing that we always thought worked actually doesn't work. It's actually something else. In physiotherapy practice, and this is sort of what I did my PhD on, as physios, we used to spend a lot of time throwing balls at people while they're sitting on the edge of a plinth or on the edge of a bed trying to improve their sitting balance. But firstly, we didn't have a good way of measuring someone's sitting balance. We didn't know if that intervention was effective, but we would do it. We would spend half an hour every day getting people to try and challenge their balance, as well as teaching them how to transfer, how to get dressed, how to get up off the floor, how to do all these other skills that were going to enable them to be able to live outside the hospital with this new body almost. We didn't jump straight away into the hospital setting to trial this, to do the research. First of all, we need to know how to measure sitting ability. So we set up developed some tools and assessed the tools to see if they actually measured what we wanted them to be measuring. If they were reliable at measuring that as well. And then we developed a physiotherapy program which we put into the community, where myself and a few other researchers went to people's places, and some people got, because these were all people who were at least 1 year after they had their injury, the gold standard for once you've finished your rehab is you don't have any more rehab unless you have a condition that you need to improve. So that was the gold standard. So our control group got no therapy. Our treatment group got an hour of sitting balance exercises 3 times a week for 6 weeks, which was quite intense. So these people who had established spinal cord injuries improved in their sitting balance ability. So I was like, okay, our treatment program is effective. Let's have a look at what happens when we put that into a hospital setting, when people have got their new injury and they're learning these new skills and we're throwing balls at them and doing all these sitting balance exercises. So everybody who entered the program, who consented to enter into it, either got just the standard therapy care, as you would in a rehabilitation hospital. The people who were in the intervention group got extra on top of that sitting balance exercises, specifically more ball throwing, more reaching and different tasks based on the program we did in the community. And what we found was that additional training did no more than just your standard interventions of practicing skills to be able to move out of the rehab setting and into the community. So, you know, all this time and energy that physios were putting in developing or training people to what we thought was sit better didn't actually work. It worked for people who weren't doing those sort of practices but could already do it because they might have been a bit more deconditioned, or that maybe those skills are actually needed to improve other specific functions once people are established and know how to do things. But utilising your therapist's time to throw balls and improve balance isn't necessarily what they need. They need to learn the skills to be able to get independent and get home.
Yeah.
So, you know, it helps to change the way that we, like these research trials that have shown no effect of your intervention can actually improve policies and practices to be more efficient in terms of therapist time or what you might be doing to help somebody actually get out of hospital.
Right.
Yeah. So that was a bit long-winded. Why still the null, like proving the null hypothesis that you know that your intervention doesn't work is still actually beneficial.
Yeah,
it's still really good to publish it, and it'd be great if more journals would accept negative results.
They're not accepting negative results?
Some journals don't accept negative results. They only want to publish those things that will benefit the journal, to be able to get more citations and more publications within that journal. So, you know, journals are a business in themselves. Let's not go down that track.
So, obviously you're not the only centre that's working on spinal cord injury research, and we've got so many other states and territories around this country that's also doing some other stuff, and a lot of different organisations. Do you want to talk about some of the people that are doing some of the work right now? if you can?
Oh gosh. So there are many centres, and because the area of spinal cord injury research in Australia is very small, so generally we all tend to know each other. So yes, the University of Sydney and the John Walsh Centre for Rehabilitation, they do a lot of absolutely amazing, fantastic research. They are generally attached with Royal North Shore Hospital, which is one of the big spinal cord injury research centres. So they have this fantastic collaboration, intimate collaboration that goes on there. And here at NeuRA, we have we're on the same site as Prince of Wales Hospital, which takes the southern part of New South Wales. So, with their spinal cord injury research, the spinal cord injuries unit there. So we've got this nice collaboration, but at the same time, we're all in Sydney. We all like to collaborate too. So we help each other out, which is fantastic. So that's New South Wales, not the only place in Australia that's doing it. Because there's also Melbourne. So there's the University of Melbourne, there's Monash University as well, and a few other little tiny private centres that have fantastic research programs as well. And so there's a lot of breathing research that's going on in Melbourne, and we collaborate with Austin Health quite a bit in the University of Melbourne with that. So there's some breathing and upper limb programs that are going on down there. There's some breathing and acute intermittent hypoxia that's going on there, which NeuRA is also collaborating with as well. So that's quite a fascinating area.
What's acute intermittent hypoxia?
I was wondering if you're going to ask that. Oh my gosh. Acute intermittent hypoxia. It's like altitude training in a way, but different. Because altitude training, you're always got hypoxia, so there's always a low level of oxygen. Whereas acute intermittent hypoxia is you are providing alternating levels of oxygen. So normal room air oxygen is at 21%. What we do with acute intermittent hypoxia is after a minute of breathing room air, we switch into a low oxygenated air of about 9% and breathe that for a minute, and then switch back into normal room air, and then switch back out into hypoxic air, and keep switching like that for about half an hour. And so you sort of get 15 minutes roughly of normal air and low oxygenated air. And by doing that, it is supposed to release some extra neurotransmitters within the synapses of the spinal cord and the peripheral nerves to release some more, I'm going to call it bone-derived neurotrophic factor, which is a...
all terms we know.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Which is a it's a growth factor which helps with regeneration. Yeah. Some people are responsive to this, so they have a bit of a gene that says, yeah, we're going to upregulate this, and some people don't have that gene, so they just respond normally to the normal neurotransmitters. So, breathing in this intermittent hypoxic air, and then doing exercises or neurostimulation afterwards is supposed to enhance the neuroplasticity of the spinal cord and the connections. So there's a lot of trials that are looking at this in spinal cord injury, and some have success and some don't have success. So it's very much an area which is, why do these people succeed and why are these people not responding? So yeah, it's quite an interesting area. Yeah. So it's very cool to be able to team up with a group in Melbourne who have expertise in this, and also people in Florida who have a lot of expertise in this as well.
Brilliant.
So, yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So that's that.
So yeah. Victoria, New South Wales.
New South Wales.
Yeah.
Yep. But there's just a few things happening in South Australia, like in Adelaide, and a few in Perth, and a little bit in Queensland as well. Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think a little bit ago you mentioned that the United States was dealing... What am I doing? You mentioned that... Mic at me, Susan. A little bit ago you mentioned that the United States was dealing with more complete spinal cord injuries, and they're... I don't know if they're moving more into like L and C. So people might be like, why is this not happening here? And you've already mentioned that there's only a certain number of parameters that you can work around. Yeah. So I don't know if you can, but can you just give me like a we're at a stage of medical research now that has come from a long line of medical research to lead up to this moment. And, you know, what has happened in the past to lead us up to this moment where people probably need to be like a little bit more aware of why we're at the stage we're at now?
It's hard because once you get into an area of research, you almost become the expert in that area. So I guess many researchers have done a PhD. So, you know, I did my PhD in sitting balance. So almost like I've become an expert in that area. But that's not always the priority area. So you sort of want to be able to branch out and become a bit of a jack of all trades. And so, you know, I branched out into breathing, which was also a passion of mine. And then, you know, walking, actually anything rehabilitation-wise is a passion. Anything to improve people's lives is a passion. So, but it comes back down to, I think, the expertise and having centres of expertise. So maybe in the States or in Switzerland, they have the expertise of that implanted stimulators, and the banks of engineers that are there and available, and maybe they also have the they don't have the same restrictions on what they can do to enable the research. So we in Australia are quite strict in terms of what we can achieve ethically. So to get a surgeon on board to implant a stimulator, to be able to support through our hospital system the length of time someone needs to stay to have that stimulator implanted, in the potential off chance that it will actually improve people's ability to walk, that's a huge consideration that an ethics committee would have to make. And not just that the funding body would also have to make, to be able to provide the funds to do that operation, to then do the rehabilitation afterwards and the research afterwards, and just the potential complications that can arise from that. Like that's just a whole minefield of problems. Here in Australia, we have a good history, particularly here at NeuRA, of electrical stimulation applied to the skin, so the transcutaneous stimulation. And you know, that's coming back from the early on when I mentioned the abdominal functional stimulation that we applied. So, you know, we've got that history of not just applying it there, but to other musculature as well. So it comes back down to the expertise, I think, that centres have. That's why, I guess, as researchers, we also go to conferences so we can share that expertise, or we go and travel to another lab to learn skills as well, so we can bring them back. Doesn't mean that we're experts when we bring them back, but we've learnt them, and then we can try and apply them once we get ethics approval to apply them as well. Sure. So, you know, it's we would like to say that we are collaborative and that we like to, you know, share our information, but then there are some people who do just like to keep that information to themselves and become a monopoly on that bit of information, keep it under closed doors and behind closed doors, under lock and key, so that nobody else can get to it and get the glory of that, or, you know, get the patent money or funding for that. You know, it's just here, I think I'm very fortunate to work with a really nice, humble team, and they're all about, you know, what can we do to benefit people.
People might want to enter into I don't know, maybe doing experimental stuff based on some data that they've seen somewhere. They might think, well, you know, why is it overseas and not here? But this data over here says that this might work. What sort of things should somebody consider when they're looking at medical research data, so then they can make a more informed, educated choice as to what they're about to do in their next steps?
That's hard.
Yeah.
Yep. I think because there's laboratory studies and trials. So I guess it depends where you're getting your data from. So if somebody has done a laboratory study, sometimes it's just on a very small number of people, and it's in preparation for setup, say, of a trial. So maybe I can use our eWalk or Get a Grip trial as an example. So before we even set up the randomized controlled trial, we had to do some laboratory studies to establish parameters to start with, to define where was going to be best to place the electrodes. So there's some single case studies, some of just like 1 or 2 people, maybe a group of 8 people, where it gives examples of different trials. Say there's like 5 trials out there, 5 studies out there. One study says you need to put the electrode on the back at L1. Another study says you need to put the electrode on the back at T11. And then there's another study that says you need to put the reference electrodes, or what we call the anodes, that you need to put them on the hip bones. And then another trial that says, oh no, you need to put them on the pubic symphysis. Another trial that says, no, you need to have a multiple array of electrodes up the spine. It's like, how do you define which is the best? And this could be somebody even reading some papers and going, they said that that the T11 position was the best position, but how do we know that is the best position? So setting up our eWalk trial, we compared all those parameters to actually determine where is the best location. And so that took quite a while in terms of going, okay, well, we don't want to put this on someone with a spinal cord injury to start with. Let's try it on ourselves and a cohort of people without spinal cord injury, without any neurological problems. Now let's try it on people with spinal cord injury. Okay, how do they respond? And what do the muscles respond? Let's analyse that data. So all that sort of takes quite a number of, I'm going to say years sometimes, to actually determine that. And it's all based on what other people have published. And so then pulling out what people have published and what they say, and does it contradict each other, and does that make sense with what you know physiologically as well? So it's gathering all that information and trying to make the best decision about what it says, to then determine if that should go into a clinical trial. So that's the first thing. So taking a small sample and really having a look at the methodology. And I think it's really coming out to understand how that is set up. So even in the methodology, how people have removed the biases of what they think will work and what won't work. So had they used past literature? Had they used physiology? Had they set it up to minimize problems and being consistent? Had they used reliable measures? Have they used measures that actually measure what you want to measure as well? So all that comes into the basic science. And then applying that, say, into a randomized controlled trial, which then has, if it's done properly, has very specific criteria about how you set it up. So firstly, are you comparing a sham to a real intervention? Or are you comparing interventions? Because when you're comparing interventions, you're just saying that one intervention is better than another intervention, potentially, not better than the standard care. So it's hard to say whether the intervention itself works. So that's one thing to consider. How those groups have been set up. Is it randomized completely? Or have you selected people to go into each group? Or have you pre-selected your people that are coming into the trial because you think they're going to be responders. Looking at those sort of things, so carefully looking through and going, well, when they report the data, is it consistent with what they said they would include? When they've analysed it, have they analysed it going in knowing who all the people are, or have they blinded that data as well before they've analysed it, so there's no bias from the statistics side of things? Have they set it up so that they know that the number of people are actually going to give a true result? Or have they only coming back to our eWalk trial, 25 in each group, and that was set out statistically based on historical records of what's been published in the outcome measure, but did they only then recruit 10 people in each group and are saying, yeah, that's enough to give an effect, which then creates a type of error in your data analysis as well. So looking at those sort of things, and it really comes down to a lot of understanding of how it's set up.
Hey Claire, what do you actually want to focus on as the future of research for you as a researcher? We've talked about rehab, we've talked about respiratory. Is there anything that you've observed that you're like, I would really love to start doing more stuff in?
That's a really, really hard question.
It's everything, isn't it?
It is everything. It's everything. Everything. Because I think...
Where do you want to start? Everywhere.
I'm going to give a really non-answer. Because small changes can make big changes for people with a spinal cord injury. So if we can impact someone's life in a small individualized way, so if we could improve someone's blood pressure by enabling them to be able to sit up and get out into the community and just interact with people, not be bedridden because of their inability to regulate their blood pressure, or something, it's just something simple, and it doesn't have to be blood pressure, just pulling one thing out. Urinary tract infections, to not have constant reminders of needing to go to the toilet and schedule your bladder emptying, to be able to not spend 2 hours in the morning doing bowel care, to be able to utilize, improve hand grip, to be able to improve your respiratory functions so that there's less potential for complications such as respiratory tract infections.
Endless.
There's endless possibilities, and I think it's just to be involved in worthwhile research that can actually improve people's lives. That's just my ultimate goal.
Yeah, you're right. Smaller things. For me, if I never have to use a catheter again.
Things that, walking is the visual thing that people who haven't had any exposure to people with spinal cord injury just go, oh my gosh, that person cannot walk. And it's like, yeah, that's probably, it's not going to say that's the least of their problems, but there's so much else that's hidden that we're really good at disguising, and because of the taboos in society, we don't talk about as well. So we don't like talking about bowels and bowel function. We don't like talking about phlegm, and we don't like talking about, how do you go to the toilet? It's just those little physical things that we keep behind those closed doors that can just improve people's lives if there were just even small improvements. So, yeah, they are worthwhile research areas.
You've been listening to Have the Nerve. I'm Susan Wood, and this podcast would not be made possible without the funding from the Department of Social Services for our resource hub. You can visit it in the show notes of this podcast or head to scia.org.au. Thank you for listening.